At the moment I stood before the wedding gathering clothed in the bridal gown my mother had once worn, the realization struck me that the man facing me did not truly belong to our faith. He was entirely different from the men I had known throughout my upbringing, a reality shaped by 22 years of existence among 47 families and a single bishop within the most isolated settlement in Lancaster County. His traditional attire was faultless, his headwear was correct, and his facial hair conformed entirely to our customs. He maintained the precise posture and the carefully lowered gaze that young men in our community master from early childhood. Every single outward detail appeared flawless, with the sole exception of his hands. The discrepancy became obvious when he reached out to clasp my hands during the service, revealing an unusual texture completely devoid of the hardened skin that every local laborer developed from decades of identical, demanding chores. His skin bore no evidence of splitting timber, mending boundaries, or enduring the daily physical toll that permanently shapes a man's touch by his 25-year milestone. This man had clearly never engaged in that type of exertion. Looking upward into his face, our eyes met, and for a fleeting instant, his expression betrayed an emotion I had never encountered in a member of our community: sheer terror. I spent more than 2 decades immersed in that traditional Pennsylvania settlement before departing 2 years ago. The events that unfolded at the front of that church on an October Saturday morning represent an experience I am only now beginning to articulate openly. When the foundational assumptions of your entire existence dissolve into something completely unrecognizable, navigating the aftermath requires immense fortitude. If this account resonates with you, consider sharing your thoughts or your own experiences below, as connecting with others who have faced profound transformations is deeply meaningful. The man had introduced himself to our community 8 months prior under the name Eli Zook. According to the explanation provided by our bishop, he was transitioning back to the faith after an extended period in the outside world during his youth, seeking a fresh beginning in a new district where his past was unknown. Having been raised to respect the word of our spiritual leaders with the deep trust that develops when you have never been given a reason to question the structure around you, I accepted the narrative. He maintained a serious demeanor, observed every community regulation, and spoke High German with a slight stiffness that everyone assumed resulted from his years away from the faith. Within 3 months, he secured my father's endorsement, leading to 4 structured, fully supervised meetings before our betrothal was announced in July, which conformed precisely to our community's formal approach to matchmaking. As the October wedding date approached, the community coordinated the preparations with practiced efficiency. Yet, during this period, I noticed subtle anomalies that I chose to put aside without closer inspection. His spoken German occasionally sounded studied rather than spontaneous, and he hesitated briefly whenever simple inquiries regarding his background arose. Furthermore, he observed commonplace household appliances and agricultural machinery with the intense curiosity of an outsider analyzing something familiar, rather than someone who had coexisted with those items since childhood. On the eve of the ceremony, lying in my childhood bedroom, an indefinable sensation gripped me, not quite anticipation or dread, but a profound, internal question that lacked the data to resolve itself. The next morning, as I held his smooth hands at the altar and witnessed his panic, the service proceeded along its traditional path, and we both uttered the expected vows. In that exact moment, a quiet determination took hold of me. I refused to let the situation pass without seeking absolute clarity. The subsequent celebration brought 47 families together inside my parents' residence, and we navigated the crowded space accepting congratulations and fulfilling the expected social roles for an audience that required the performance. Throughout the afternoon, I carefully monitored his movements and noticed the sharp, analytical attention he directed toward the elder men, a gaze focused on assessing and cataloging rather than reconnecting with an old faith. That evening, Once the final guests departed and we were left alone in the kitchen, I looked across the table and directly stated that I knew he was someone else, creating a quiet space that required no question mark. After a long silence, he acknowledged that his name was not Eli Zook, revealing that he had known of my discovery since our hands met during the service. His actual name was Daniel Mercer, a 26-year-old media professional who had spent 8 months embedded within our settlement to gather material for an internal documentary on our lifestyle. Neither the bishop nor the broader community suspected his true identity. Only his supervisor in Philadelphia was aware of the project. Entering into a marriage had never been part of his initial plan, but the accelerated momentum of our community's social structure had pushed the situation in an unanticipated direction, leading to a sequence of small choices that ultimately placed him at a traditional altar in plain clothes, wedded to a woman he had misled for months. Listening to this outsider with his smooth palms and practiced dialect detail his months of calculated deception, I did not experience anger or a sense of betrayal. Instead, I felt a deep shock of self-recognition, realizing that I too had been performing a role for 22 years. I had spent my entire life presenting the image of the submissive, compliant daughter so perfectly that my true identity had been entirely obscured by the expectations of the community. In that sense, the man across from me and I were remarkably similar. He had maintained a character for 8 months, while I had done so for over 2 decades. Our conversation extended for 3 hours as Daniel detailed the planning behind his investigation and the gradual, unexpected shift in his feelings that completely disrupted his professional detachment. He explained that somewhere between our communal worship services and our deep conversations in my mother's kitchen regarding faith and conviction, his performance had ceased. He expressed that standing at the altar that morning, his fear stemmed from the realization that he was facing someone he had thoroughly deceived, causing him to completely abandon the project in favor of the real relationship unfolding between us. He offered to accept whatever decision I made, whether that meant his immediate departure or facing the community's judgment, wanting me to know his true identity before we took another step forward. Growing up, I frequently encountered the scriptural promise from the book of John regarding how the truth brings ultimate liberation. Yet, my community had always chosen which truths to emphasize and which to obscure, prioritizing social conformity over individual reality. Facing a man who offered absolute transparency, I chose to listen as he spent hours describing his life, his apartment, his profession, and the vast city of Philadelphia, a place I had been conditioned to fear but had never been allowed to see. He detailed his world with complete honesty, outlining both its immense challenges and its genuine advantages, until my initial apprehension transformed into a profound curiosity. 3 days later, we departed together without conflict or drama. I composed a letter to my parents that required an entire night to draft, a message I still mentally refine, assuring them of my safety, explaining that I was exercising my own free will, and reaffirming my enduring affection for them. I left the folded paper on the kitchen table beside a jar of wedding preserves and walked out of the house to where Daniel was waiting at the road's end. We settled into a residence in Philadelphia, and the planned documentary was permanently shelved by Daniel's own choice before we even crossed the city limits, as he recognized that the initial assignment no longer held any true value. Today, we share an apartment that faces the morning sun, and over the past 2 years, I have mastered driving, navigated urban transit systems, and familiarized myself with a geography that once seemed entirely incomprehensible. While my thoughts occasionally drift back to my family and the crisp autumn mornings in Lancaster County, I also reflect on the wedding guests who celebrated a union built on dynamics neither participant fully understood at the time. I consider the smoothness of Daniel's hands at the altar and how that single detail revealed everything, and I continue to explore the true meaning of freedom within a life built on absolute transparency.